You're listening to Breakfast. Our guest this morning is Foreign Minister Stephen Smith. Minister, some of our commentators are questioning the link you've made between the war in Afghanistan and the terrorist bombings in Jakarta. I noticed that Professor Hugh White says, quote, "It's an illusion to think that if you fix Afghanistan, we'll be safe from terrorism. Ideologically and practically, the activities of Noor and Top, the alleged mastermind behind the Jakarta bombings, have nothing to do with Afghanistan." Do you agree?
Well, I've made a number of points about that. Firstly, I've said both in Indonesia and in the Afghanistan-Pakistan border area, we're making efforts to combat terrorism. And Australians have been on the receiving end of terrorism, not just in Bali or Jakarta, but also in London, also at the World Trade Center, also at Mumbai. One thing we do know is that people associated with the Bali bombings did receive some training in Afghanistan. But I've also made this point. There is no one location where international terrorism is restricted to. There are efforts we have to make in and with the Indonesian authorities. There are efforts we are making as part of a UN sponsored, UN-mandated international force in the Afghanistan-Pakistan border area. If we eliminate or reduce the terrorist threat in Afghanistan, that doesn't mean that the job is done. There are other parts of the world, including in Southeast Asia, where we need to be vigilant and make efforts as well. But what we do know is just as governments around the world communicate, so do international terrorists, and they look to each other for support and for succour. And we know there is evidence that they train together or try and train together. So the point that's been made about Afghanistan is that Afghanistan is a hotbed of terrorism. The international community recognises that. It's a threat to the international community, and that's why we're part of that effort. At the same time, the international community recognises, and the Indonesian authorities recognise, that there are difficulties in Indonesia. And to their credit, the Indonesian authorities have, over the last half dozen years, been the most successful individual country in terms of bringing terrorists to trial in their hundreds.
Minister, can I move now to the Stern-Hu case in China? Malcolm Turnbull was quoting Chairman Mao yesterday on this program as justification for standing up to China. He says that what China respects from other countries is a tough fight. Let's have a listen to what he told us.
In 1949, when Chairman Mao succeeded in his revolution and he got to the top of Tiananmen, the Gate of Heavenly Peace, in Beijing, right there in the centre of the capital, his first words were, "The Chinese people have stood up." That's what he said. The Chinese people have stood up. China respects nations that stand up for their own rights and stand up for their own citizens. So Kevin Rudd's complacency for that first 10 or 11 days can only be interpreted by a proud nation, China, as a lack of interest.
What's your reaction to that? Have we underestimated the importance of not so much megaphone diplomacy, but the bare-knuckle defence of our interests and our citizens?
Well, a number of points. Firstly, Malcolm Turnbull's position on this has been, on day one, you pick up the phone and you demand Mr. Hu's release and demand his release immediately. That's what he said on day one. And there's more than one person, including me, who has said that was essentially a rash judgment for him to make and a glib solution to a difficult and complex problem. From the moment of Mr. Stern-Hu's detention on a Sunday night in Shanghai, our officials in Shanghai, in Canberra and in Beijing have been at the Chinese authorities. And when I was in Egypt last week for the Non-Aligned Movement Summit, I spoke to Vice Minister He about this matter, and we've made the point that as appropriate, I will raise it with my counterpart. If and when it's appropriate, the Prime Minister will raise it with his counterpart. But in the meantime, this is a difficult and complex case. There is no glib solution here, as Mr. Turnbull would have people believe. And we very strongly believe that the best way of seeking to protect and defend Mr. Hu's interests is by a calm, methodical, assured approach. I described my conversation with Vice Minister He as being polite but firm, and that in our way is the best, and that in our view is the best way to seek to advance his interests. And Mr Turnbull's approach, I know, is not shared by a whole range of people, including, for example, Mr Costello, who has effectively said that one should keep the big phone calls till down the track, and also by very experienced China observers or commentators, including the former Ambassador Ross Garnaut.
And just very finally, Minister, I know you're trying to get some more information on the charges from the Chinese. Do you think you might have that opportunity? I know you're heading off to another international meeting this evening.
Well, when I saw...
Will you be joined by your Chinese foreign counterpart there, foreign ministry counterpart?
Well, that's not been confirmed. I am off tonight to Thailand, where we have the ASEAN-related annual meetings, the meeting of foreign ministers for the East Asia Summit, the meeting of foreign ministers for the ASEAN Regional Forum. I'll be there. I'll certainly be having a further conversation with Indonesian Minister Hassan Wirajuda about the Jakarta bombings. If my Chinese counterpart is there, I hope to have the opportunity to speak to him about Stern Hu. But what was clear from my conversation in Egypt with Vice Minister He, and what's been confirmed by officials, is that the Chinese are dealing with this as a individual single matter, and it's quite clear that what they are now focusing on is bribery or criminal activity related to iron ore negotiations. Because the Chinese take a much broader view of the notion of state secrets than, for example, we would, the description in the early days of stealing state secrets was, of course, cause for wider or more general concern. But whilst we would prefer to have more information, Vice Minister He also made it clear there's an ongoing investigation. If and when Mr Stern Hu is charged, then clearly that much more detailed information and the nature of the precise charges, if any, will be there.
Foreign Minister, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Fran. Thanks very much.